Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount today. And so, if you want to go to the end of Matthew chapter 7, we're going to be looking at verses 24 through 29. And today, we are really going to look at one of the more interesting parables or pictures that Jesus paints about faith. And with that said, it is going to be a very, very interesting end to the Sermon on the Mount, and then a couple verses about the reaction of this great Sermon on the Mount. So, Matthew chapter 7, we're going to start with verses 24 through 27. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, they will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Now, there's a couple things that I think are really interesting about this picture that Jesus is trying to paint about faith. First off, the rains that come and the situations that hit both houses, the one of rock and then the one of sand, are the exact same. So, if you could say, like, well, the lesser storm hit the rock house and that's why it didn't come down, whereas a harder storm hit the sand house and that's why it came down. Well, that's not the case here. They're the exact same. And I think that's really a good thing to see is that, look, the same tribulate or the same hardships and tribulations that you face when you are not following Jesus, guess what? There's still going to be trials and tribulations when that hit you when you are following Jesus. It's just the foundation that you are standing on that has changed. And so that's where we get to the houses themselves. So the first house is this rock house. It is not really described as anything beautiful. It's just a house made out of rock or on the rock. There's nothing that makes it seem majestic. It's just on the rock. Whereas the other house, the second house, is made of or is built on the sand. So again, there's no mention of this, the majesties of the house. It's all about the foundation of those houses. But part of me, you could think, okay, maybe the rock house isn't that beautiful, but like some sand castles are really, really cool, right? But it comes down very, very easily because of its foundation. Again, doesn't talk about the actual house here. It's focused on the foundation. And that is where we get into the aspect of faith, which we talked about a little bit last time with verses 15 through 23, with the fruits showing faith, and then the fact that with the blunt statement that Jesus makes in verses 21 through 23, that look, you could say right things and you could even do some godly things, but if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, if you are not following him, then he never knew you. And well, here we are with the aspect of what is it like to have a foundation of faith on your life. You can withstand quite a bit, not because of what you have done, but because of everything that Jesus has done. And I think that's what is trying to definitely be shown with this little illustration about building your house on the rock instead of on the sand. And so I think that's really, really interesting to see. But now Jesus is done. The Sermon on the Mount is finished. This grand, just sermon that no human pastor or preacher could ever teach or could ever reach, because one, it's Jesus, but it's just this beautiful look uh, at so many different things that you and I can do, as followers of Jesus, and to make us more and more like Jesus as well, while also avoiding things like hypocrisy and retaliation and revenge. And it's just this beautiful, beautiful section of scripture. And well, not surprising, those who were listening were astonished. So let's look at that reaction here at the end of Matthew chapter 7, verses 28 and 29. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. So first off, it makes a lot of sense, why they would be astonished, for a couple of reasons. One, my guess is Jesus is probably not a monotonous teacher. He's probably not somebody that doesn't use vocal inflection. I bet you money he probably uses that. Or absolutely, he used that with the Sermon on the Mount. So you have that aspect of the fact that he is grabbing their attention vocally. Well, the content is also grabbing their attention too. He's going through things in the Mosaic Law, and yet he's expounding on them. It doesn't mean that he's deleting them, but he's really expounding upon them. And it just makes you go, man, this guy is different. Something about Jesus is different from our scribes and our Pharisees that we go to hear in synagogue. It is really just something different. And so it was astonishing. Uh, Now, the verse 29 is interesting. For he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. It's interesting that scribes is used here and not Pharisees. Scribes are those that are ones who copy the manuscripts of ancient texts, in this case, the Old Testament, and that was their job mostly. Now, they did do some teaching as well, but not as much as like the Pharisees. So for Jesus to be vocal here, that's a little bit of a difference. He's a lot more vocal than a scribe probably would be. But the other big difference, though, is the authority that he used. When he's talking about things like the Old Testament law aspects, when he's talking about things like ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. His use of illustrations and his way of just getting to the point, as well as we saw last time with not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Verses 21 through 23 in Matthew chapter 7. That has this just tone of authority. And Jesus brings that to the table. And it's really, really cool to see that. And so that is a big reason why they are astonished. And by the way, that's another reason why the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders of Jesus's day, are not really big fans of him for his whole ministry, really. And so that is that's kind of the way that we wrap up the Sermon on the Mount. And hopefully you were blessed by it as much, if not more, than I was. It was just a joy to walk through it with you. And I will see you next week with the Broadman Word. But thanks for spending some time with me today as we wrap up the Sermon on the Mount. Thanks.